Hello, everybody, and welcome to the newest episode of the Theater Enthusiast podcast. As always, I have my hot priest candle. I am drinking out of my hot priest mug, and today's guest is a performer, a producer, and philanthropist. Please welcome Jamie deRoy. I'm going to say it again. I don't
Hello.
have the app applause. I do have it, but nobody can hear it, so it's just me attempting to applaud. Thank you so much for coming on.
My
So
pleasure.
let's start from the beginning. Where are you from?
I'm from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania.
And
A great place to grow up, I truly believe. Born in Pittsburgh, and the first year of my life in Youngstown, Ohio, but the bulk of my early days all in Pittsburgh.
And what got you interested in performing in the arts?
Well, I don't know. I went to dancing school like every little girl, and you're in the little pink tutu and the ballet shoes, and you have these big dreams. I guess when I was little, like every little girl, I thought I wanted to be a ballerina. That was quickly. I realized that I did not have what it takes to be a ballerina. Last night I was with Tyler Peck, and I know I don't have what it takes to be a ballerina. But I would do little community theater even when I was quite young, and then I don't know when he made the investment, but in 1954, Pajama Game opened, and my father had invested a little bit of money through a friend of his in Pittsburgh who was helping out Harold Prince. So when they went to the opening, my parents, and then sometime after, my parents took me to New York, and I went to see Pajama Game. I got to go backstage and meet John Raitt, Janice Page, Eddie Foy Jr. And if I wasn't already hooked, I was hooked, from sitting in front in the audience and watching them so close, and then going backstage and meeting them. And then the following year, he invested in Harold Prince's Damn Yankees. So again, I got to go to see the show and to meet the stars, and it was really, really exciting. And I just always loved it, but I always wanted to be in the performing end. I never thought I'd be in the producing end ever. It never occurred to me in my wildest dreams.
Yeah. So what brought you to New York?
Being from Pittsburgh, I had done a lot of community theater. I went to Carnegie Tech, now Carnegie Mellon, and I really just wanted to be in New York. So I moved to New York. I went to a school called AMDA, American Musical and Dramatic Academy, and I was in a class with Tyne Daly, and she was my friend from way back then. And then I started doing children's records for Pickwick International, called the Show and Tell series, and I worked with a lot of really big Broadway stars on that series, which was many records, which I can't believe that I never got a copy of one of them, which just is crazy, because I didn't know anything about putting like a reel together. It would have been a very good idea, but I didn't, and I earned some money, and I loved it, and I just started working, and then I started auditioning and stuff. I did The Drunkard early on. I did it off Broadway at the 13th Street Theater. I did it all over the South. Our musical director was Barry Manilow. He also wrote all of the incidental music, meaning he wrote everything that was original, and they used some songs that were, just from any kind of catalog that they chose to use. But he wrote some pretty funny stuff for that show, and I had a great time doing it. And then touring the South was just really great fun, because in New York you only did it on the weekends, and on the road you did it 8 times a week.
Yeah. So what was tour life like for you?
I'm sorry, what was what?
Tour life?
I mean, it was fun. I toured with The Drunkard, and then another year I toured with Stop the World, I Want to Get Off. We're not major tours. We're doing theatering, which is very different than a national tour. Not as high level, but it's still equity, but just not as high level. And but fun. I mean, you would go to a place and you'd be in a place for like 4 or 5 weeks, and you got to meet the people in that town, and made friends all over the South. And there were a few places that either I knew people or my parents knew people that would sort of take me under their wing, and it was just a really, really fun time. And having to work on a show for that long, I mean, most people look at it and say, how can you do a show eight times a week after week? It gets easier and more fun, and you find new things to do with it. In The Drunkard, I just found so many fun things to do in a comedic style. And luckily that was a comedic show. It was a melodrama, but it was meant to be funny. So I just had a great time doing that one in particular.
Yeah. And you started performing, and you ended up opening up for Joan Rivers at one point.
Well, that was years later. I used to go to see Joan whenever I was in LA or when she came to New York. And I always kind of dreamed of wanting to be an opening act for her. And I'd already been an opening act for a zillion comics, but I was an opening act as a singer. I was what they called a girl singer. And I would open for various comics. So when I moved to LA in it was like the spring of 1980. By that point, I had decided that I did not want to be just a straight singer anymore. I wanted to be a comedic singer. I really didn't think that I wanted to be a full stand-up comic. That's a whole other career, and that's, I think, one of the hardest things in show business to do. But I did like doing funny songs. And so I knew that she was going to be opening at the LA Improv, and I got in touch with the agent. And, at first they were a little reluctant. I mean, they came to see me at the Comedy Store. At the Comedy Store at that time, the upstairs room was called the Belly Room, and it was for female comics. So I was doing all my special material and funny songs upstairs. And Eric Gold, who was working for Irvin Arthur at the time, came to see me, and he said, we'd love to have you open for Joan, but you can't do the funny songs. And I said, if I can't do the funny songs, I don't want to open, because that's what I came out here to do. I don't want to go backwards. I said, there's just a zillion singers out there that are way better than I am, and I know that. But where I live now is in comedy. So they talked it over, and they talked with Joan, and they said, sure, let her try. So the first night that I opened for at the Improv, and Edgar, her husband, was walking towards me, I'm like, oh my God, I'm getting fired tonight. Because I did. It was fun. I got a lot of laughs, and I had a ball. And I was ready to be, this was thanks a lot. I guess it just didn't work out having funny songs open for a stand-up comic. And he came over and said, Joan loved it. She said she never had an easier time to walk out on stage. And if you want to go even further with your comedy, just go for it. And I always was so thankful to her for that freedom to just try things and be what, and again, I was not trying to compete with her. I was not a stand-up comic. I didn't want to be a stand-up comic. Mm-hmm. So it was just great fun to work with her. And I just always found her to be very, very generous and open. And then when I came back to New York, she went into Michael's Pub, and she requested that I open for her there, which I did. Now at Michael's Pub, which was at the time right around the corner from PJ Clark's on 3rd Avenue and 55th Street. The entrance was on 55th Street. It's a really nice club. But every act I had ever seen open for Joan, the owner, Gil Weiss, the owner of the club, he would never even turn the house lights down for the opening act. And it made it, I thought, really kind of unfair for them, because people talked through the singer. Now, in those days, she always had singers opening, but they talked through that. And I didn't want that. I mean, if I was going to open for, I wanted people to listen to me. I didn't come there to be, competing with 18,000 conversations going on in the room. So we're backstage. We shared a dressing room. She's got Spike there, her little dog. And he walks in and she said, Gil, I have a favor to ask you. I want you to turn the house lights down for when Jamie goes on. And he like gave a look like, well, I never do that. And she said, you're going to do that. And he said, okay. And then she said, look, after he turns the house light, you go on stage and you introduce yourself, because I can only ask him one thing at a time. But the other thing that she did ask him for at that moment was she asked for a hamburger. And he brought the hamburger back, and she took the hamburger out of the bun and she put it on the plate, and then she put it on the floor for Spike. And Gil Weiss watched this happen, and I thought he would have a heart attack. And when he walked out of the room, I kissed her on the cheek and I said, you have no idea what you just did. She said, what do you mean? I said, well, when Julie Wilson performed here, she ordered a Coke and he charged her for the Coke. I said, for you to order a hamburger and give it to Spike, I was in heaven, because it killed him. It just would kill him. That it's like, you're feeding my hamburger to your dog. It was perfect. But I worked there a few times and always just, had a really, really great time, with her. And that was just, kind of the beginning of me going off on my own and just, not really being an opening act anymore, just doing my own show.
Yeah. So you talked about doing comedic songs. Were these songs that you wrote yourself, or did you write them with someone? Did people write them for you?
Some songs I found, some songs I wrote, other songs were written either for me or by friends. It just kept evolving. And I had a friend at the time, Barry Mitchell, that was writing a lot of parodies. So when I started doing Jamie deRoy and Friends in 1990, which was like about 10 years after I had opened for Joan, he was writing, and then eventually he went on. He was doing a lot of stuff for World News Now, and I did a few of the pieces with him on the air. But Barry Kleingord, who became my director, also was a wonderful lyricist, and he wrote a lot of the parodies. So, but if I would hear something funny, I mean, one of my staple songs and one of the funniest songs I do, and certainly my favorite song, is called Jews Don't Camp. And that was written by David Buskin, who was a songwriter and a folk singer for many, many years. I knew him forever. And he got in a group with two other folk singers, and they formed a group called Modern Man, and I thought they were just great, and I produced them at a couple of venues. And when he said, what can I do for you to repay you? And I said, just let me sing that song. I didn't want any money from them. Now I sing the song. It's my favorite song to perform.
So how did the evolution of Jamie, deRoy, and Friends happen?
Well, it was sort of a twofold thing. I mean, through the 80s when I started, and I really started in the 80s to do all this special material. When you played these clubs, and I was doing my own show, so the whole hour was just me.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times, clubs wanted like new shows, and it was very difficult to keep coming up with new comedy material. Comedy material is a lot harder to find than just a song. I mean, as a singer, you could change your songs every week, and every month you could say, oh, I'm going to do all of Jerome Kern or all of Rodgers and Hart. And, I mean, you have to learn them. I'm not saying it's totally easy, but it's a lot easier to put a show together. But as far as comedic songs, very, very hard, I think, to find the material. So I started really getting kind of like, this is almost too taxing to continually trying to find new material, learn new material. And I just, and I had, they had discovered a lump in my thyroid, and they were saying that, at one point I might have to have surgery. And if I have surgery, it could change my voice, or I could totally lose my voice. So I started thinking about things that I could do if I couldn't sing anymore. And I used to throw these annual 30th birthday parties, and I would usually just have one, maybe two people, friends of mine, perform a couple of songs at the party. And it just sort of became an extension of my birthday parties. So, but instead of just one or two people, I, would have a whole show of friends on stage. And, I'd see something that a performer did that I thought was just great. And it's not like I want to go and say, hey, I thought that was great. Can I do it? That's their material. I'm not going to steal their material.
Mm-hmm.
So I said, come on my show and do it on my show. And we were videotaping everything. And then from the video tapes, my friend who videotaped everything, and I used to do a show with him called Broadway Beat. Bradshaw Smith, we started off Cabaret Beat. So I did Cabaret Beat with Bradshaw. When he turned it into Broadway Beat with Richard Ridge,
Mm-hmm.
he said to me, why don't we just turn your show put it on TV? And that's what we started doing. And we were doing a lot of shows, and I don't know how I did it. I had a show on television, a half-hour show every week. Now I have it every other week, and I find it really hard to keep up with. But in those days, I gave a new show every single week.
Mm-hmm.
And we did a lot more live performances then than I do now.
Yeah. Where can people find your show every other week?
Well, pretty much, unless you live in East Hampton, it plays out there. But in New York, it plays every other Monday. They usually repeat it on the second Monday, but every other Monday at 8:00 on channel. It's 1993. It's a high definition channel. We were on a lower channel before, but I started noticing that they were showing it like a letterbox, and I worked too hard to make it look good, to have it be shown like it's on your phone, So when I called them and said, what can we do? And they said, we'll move you. We'd be thrilled to move you to high definition, but it is a higher channel. And I said, you know what, that's fine. People seem to videotape it anyway. Most of my friends are out pretty much like I am almost every night, or they're working every night. So they set their VCRs to tape it anyway. So they don't really care if it's on 57 or 107 or 1993,
Mm-hmm.
And when we started with Cabaret Beat, that's when cable really started. And I was an early friar, and it was channel 35. We were on at 10:30 to 11. And so I'd walk into the Friars Club sometimes, and some guy would say to me, "Oh, I caught your TV show last night. You were on that cabaret beat. You were like at Rainbow and Stars interviewing people." I said, "Oh yeah." And I said, "You caught our show?" I said, "What, were you tuning in early for Robin Bird?" Because we preceded Robin Bird at 11 o'clock, Channel 35 kind of changed what they were presenting. And Robin Bird was at 11. It was pretty funny. I always caught them when, they were trying to be very cool, but I knew why they caught my show.
Yeah. So you mentioned the Friars Club. You were actually one of the first 8 women to actually be inducted into the Friars Club. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
It was really great fun. I joined in November of 98, and somewhat before that, it was very daunting because they gave you this it was almost like a cardboard application that was very difficult to get in a typewriter. And I didn't have a typewriter anymore. I was, an early convert to computers, and it said must be typewritten. So I kept putting it off and leaving it to the side of my desk. And I finally said, screw this, I'm going to just handwrite it. It doesn't fit. I don't have a typewriter. I'm not going to somebody's house just to do that. So I, filled it in longhand, and then I got accepted, but they did an article in the New York Times on the first 7 friars, and I was the 8th. And I said, if I only had typewritten that stupid application, maybe I would have been in the article. Who knows? Or they were sitting there saying, so who are the female friars? And they got to my name and they went, 7's enough. Who knows?
Yeah. But for those listening, can you explain to our listeners what the Friars Club is?
Well, it was a club that was really started by press agents and performers, and it was all men for many, many years until 1988 when I joined, and there had been a lawsuit to allow women in. The lawsuit was kind of started by Gloria Allred, and it allowed women to join. So, some of the early friars were Joan Rivers and Angelica Houston and Liza Minnelli. I was probably the only non-name, in the early days. But it was a real fraternity, and it was fun. At lunch, they had a table that they used to call the bachelor's table. If you didn't have someone to have lunch with, you could sit there. But because I was so early on as a female friar, and the other women were not really, coming to the club for lunches and stuff, it took a lot of guts for me to say finally to the maitre d', am I allowed to sit there? Because I don't have anyone to have lunch with today. And he looked at me and he said, of course you're allowed to sit there. But it was called the bachelor's table, so I didn't know, and it was all men. But, it kind of broke the ice. And then, right after that, they started bringing more and more women in, which was really fun. And I mean, they had a gym. They obviously at the very beginning didn't have a women's locker room, only a men's locker room. So the gym I could only use in the mornings and had to be out of the gym and the dressing room by noon so that the men could come in and use it. And then ultimately they built on top of the club, and they built they made a ladies' locker room. There's a men's locker room. They built on top of the club and built offices and stuff and expanded. It was, it was just kind of in its heyday. It was really absolutely great fun to be, part of the friars for me in the early days of women joining. Just get it and say I can't, do it, whatever. Sorry, the phone is ringing.
You're very popular. It's fine.
Yeah, popular with all these people that are either scam artists or, I hate all these things where, oh, who hires your office staff? cleaning staff. And we don't have a cleaning staff.
Oh, I work for a medical company, and like once in a blue moon I'll get an email saying like, oh, your office, who provides the lunches? And I'm like, I work from home, so you're emailing the wrong
Right.
person. Sorry. I
Or
understand.
this is Medicare calling.
Yeah. So what got you into producing? Because you have a very big list of producing credits for Broadway and off Broadway. And some
Well,
like
the
you won
first,
a Tony for like one of the greatest shows I've ever seen, The Ferryman. So yeah.
that's definitely one of my favorites.
Mhm.
Well, like so many things in my life, I got into producing accidentally. I moved out of my building on West 72nd Street, where I had lived for 25 years, and I moved into a new building, and I met a press agent by the name of Jeffrey Richards, and he did a lot of PR for off Broadway, some Broadway shows, and he would invite me to go see things. I don't even remember. I mean, I guess I was doing my TV show at the time. I don't know if we had already branched into plugging Broadway and off Broadway and stuff like that. But I think he just thought I was a good audience, and he invited me to Alice Tully Hall to see a one-night stand of a troupe from London. They were called the Reduced Shakespeare Company, and they did a show called The Complete Works of William Shakespeare Abridged, and they'd been doing it in London for a number of years. He brought these three guys over, and they did one night at Alice Tully Hall, and I just loved it. And the next day he called me and said, what did you think? And I said, oh my God, I thought it was great. I said, it's so smart, so clever. And he said, well, how would you like to produce it? And I was like, produce it? What is that? He said, well, I think you'd be really good at it. I was married at the time, and my husband said to me, well, why don't you try? You're saying no, and you didn't even try. And so I called him back and I said, tell me what I'd have to do. And he did. And so I started raising money for a complete works of William Shakespeare Abridged, and we did it off Broadway at what it was then called the West Side Arts Theater on West 43rd Street, in the downstairs theater. And we recast it because you couldn't have the kids from London. First of all, they were doing it in London, but it would have been way too expensive to pay them per diem to stay here. And it just kind of snowballed after that. I mean, I didn't go quite as fast in the very beginning because I was a little bit shy, but boy, I tell you, once you get into it, then everybody starts calling it. And I was also into it sooner than a lot of the co-producers that I know now. So it was almost like I had a head start or something, but it was always fun for me. And the first Broadway thing I did, well, I worked on Say Goodnight, Gracie. My friend Rupert Holmes had written that, and I was just an associate producer on that, but it was George Burns talking about Gracie, and I loved it. And it was Frank playing George Burns. Now, my friend Louise Duarte, she could do both George and Gracie, as a stand-up, and she's a great impressionist. And she had been on my show as a guest doing, George and Gracie. But so when this came along, it was like a natural for me. But the first real above the title credit I ever had on Broadway was Chita Rivera, The Dancer's Life. And I was, as like everybody in theater, I was a big fan of Chita Rivera. So that was the first one, and that kind of snowballed everything.
Yeah. So I just want to say the complete works of William Shakespeare Abridged brought me back to high school because when I was in drama class, there was two different drama classes, and one class did the complete works of William Shakespeare Abridged, and the other class did the complete history of America Abridged, which is the same.
Oh, how funny.
People. Yeah, so the class I was in did the complete history of America Abridged, but I did see the Shakespeare one. So when you said it, it just like brought me back to my high school youth. So thank you for that. Because I
Then we
mean,
brought it back in 2001. Jeffrey thought it's time to bring Shakespeare Bridge back.
mhm,
And unfortunately, the timing was not,
yeah.
not to anybody's, it just happened that way. We started rehearsal on September 10th, and then September 11th happened. And I called Jeffrey, and we live in the same building. And I said, what should we do? And I mean, it was such a devastating day. And he said, they don't want people to stop. They want, we're going to take a few days off. And then we're going to go back to rehearsal. And we did. And we didn't do it in the same space. We did it down on East 15th Street, at a theater that it doesn't exist anymore, with a different cast. But, a lot of these young cast members that were in our shows, went on to have some very nice careers. So you feel good starting somebody off in their career. There's always a little special place in my heart for anybody that, in their early days that we gave them a job, whether it was Shakespeare Abridged or something on Broadway, it didn't matter. It's just, that you're a little bit instrumental in sending them on their way.
Yeah. So just to name some of the shows, because I have a huge list already. So The Country Girl, All My Sons, The Seagull, Speed the Plow, Finian's Rainbow, Desire Under the Elms, the revival of Ragtime, Behanning in Spokane, Lend Me a Tenor, Catch Me If You Can, Peter and the Starcatcher, Nice Work If You Can Get It, A Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder, The Realistic Joneses, the revival of Fiddler on the Roof, Significant Other, the revival of Sunday in the Park with George, The Play That Goes Wrong, Once on This Island, Angels in America, Pretty Woman, as I mentioned, The Ferryman, which is like still today one of my all-time favorite things I've ever seen, To Kill a Mockingbird, what else? The revival of Company, Beetlejuice, Mr. Saturday Night, and currently happening, Leopoldstadt, hopefully I said that correctly, Parade, Peter Pan That Goes Wrong, and shortly coming up, Goodnight Oscar, Life of Pi, which just started, New York, New York, and tomorrow night, the show you were producing, Yes, I Can Say That by Judy Gold.
Right. I'm doing that with Primary Stages. I've done a lot of shows with Primary Stages. And one of them was very special to me. I mean, a lot of them were, but one that was particularly special was with Tyne Daly and her brother, because, as I had mentioned, that I had gone to school with her early on. And to be able to do the play was called Downstairs, and they were both in it. It was a terrific play. And then at one point, Primary asked me to do a special Jamie deRoy and Friends as a benefit for Primary Stages, because I was doing all these benefits for what was the Actors Fund, is now the Entertainment Community Fund. And I said, I would love to do that. And I said, the first person I want to call is Tyne Daly, since she recently did Downstairs. And, we started our theater life together. So when I called her, she said, not only do I want to do it, I want to sing a duet with you. And I went, a duet with me? And she said, yeah. And I said, like what? And she said, the one we did at school. But that was so long ago. I said, Tyne, I vaguely remember doing a duet with you in school, but for the life of me, I couldn't tell you what it was. She said, Marry the Man Today. And I said, that's a hard song. she said, we can do it. So we did it. But what was so ironic was this particular benefit that we did for primary stages. And I did it at the green room because I'd been doing all my fundraisers at Birdland upstairs. I didn't want to have it confused, that they thought it was the Actors Fund, because it was very different. And everybody on the show had a connection to primary stages. Well, that show was March 11th, 2020. And March 12th, all of Broadway closed down.
Yeah.
So it was like we had no idea what we were facing. We kind of were hearing dribs and drabs of, things could be closed down. Any venue over 500 seats could be closed down. And I kept thinking, well, over 500 seats, that's all of Broadway. But under 500 seats, that's off Broadway. I could keep going to off Broadway. So little did I know that a few days later they'd close off Broadway. And then I went, well, I could go to restaurants and just have dinners with my friends. And then they closed the restaurants. And then it was like, you're home. And that was it.
Yeah. How did you stay creative during the pandemic?
Well, you had to be kind of inventive. And one day I was sitting around thinking about stuff of what I could do, that I could do with stuff that had already been recorded. I kept doing my TV shows. We just did theme shows. So we went back and we would edit the shows so that one show would be like all love songs, or just various themes, all women, or whatever it was. And we came up with 8 zillion different themes. So that part was easy. But the harder part was, one day it came to me that I had written just a couple of songs in my life. One of them was called Wish on the Moon, and the other one was called Daddy's Girl. I mean, I've written a couple of others, but these were the two that I particularly liked and that we had recorded. And not only had I recorded it, but actually they'd been recorded first by other people. So it had a little bit of, it's just not me singing it. But I called a friend of mine who's an animator, and she's a terrific animator, and Candy Kugel. And so, we're all in the same boat. She's sitting, in her office home. And I said, I want to send you 2 songs to listen to and tell me if either one of them would lend itself to being an animated short film. So I sent her both songs, and she said, I think Wish on the Moon is more of a story song, and I think that I'd like to try to do that. So we did. And it got into a lot of film festivals, a lot. And it was always a really sweet song, because it had a progression of, like, when you're a little girl, of what you wish for. But then you grow up, and then you have, these same wishes, and then you have a child, and then, it's seen through their eyes. So she animated that one first. And then after she did that, and we had, I didn't look at it as a huge success, but she thought it was, because we'd gotten in all these film festivals. She said, now I know how to do Daddy's Girl. Let's do that too. So we did Daddy's Girl. And since then we've won like 4, big awards, and gotten into about 15 film festivals. And she did an amazing job of Daddy's Girl. I just wish my father had still been alive to see it. He was alive when I sang it at a concert that he was at, and that, made me feel really good. But it would have been really cool to have him see this little animated film. So Wish on the Moon was a 3-minute film, and Daddy's Girl was a 4-minute film. And they're just sweet little films that, I could leave behind.
Yeah. Where can people watch these films?
Well, I think they live on Vimeo. I don't even know if they live on my own. I have to say, not the best person about on top of what's on my website and whatnot, but it's jamiederoy.com if we ever, get it in full running order. But you can Google Wish on the Moon, like a film, and it's written by me and Barry Kleinbord and Shelley Markham, and Daddy's Girl I wrote with Lanny Myers and Jane R. Snyder. So I think, it's probably on YouTube also. So many things on YouTube that I never knew were on YouTube. Mm-hmm. I did it was really for my television show with Rick McKay. I did backstage at the Sound of Music when Rebecca Luker was starring on Broadway in the Sound of Music at the Martin Beck Theater, which is now called the Al Hirschfeld. Mm-hmm. We got access to go and film out front and backstage and talk to everybody. It's the most concise and elaborate show I've ever done. And Rick had put it on YouTube in like 3 parts. So it can be seen, and it's almost educational because, we talk to the child wrangler, we talk to the children in the Sound of Music, we talked to the sound man and the prop guy and the costume guy and the stars. I mean, it was lovely. Also, I was in Rebecca Luker's dressing room when she was being fitted with her wig. They just put the microphone on her over her skull cap, which goes under the wig. And we were talking, and she was going to be leaving the show. And I said, "Who's going to replace you?" And she said, "My understudy." And I said, "Wow, that doesn't happen very often where the understudy actually replaces the star." And so I said to Rick, "Let's go find the understudy." And the reason that they did that was they were bringing in Richard Chamberlain, and they didn't want to pay 2-star salaries. Mm-hmm. So they gave it to the understudy, who was quite young and new but fabulous. Yeah. And it was Laura Benanti. Mm-hmm. So she stepped into Rebecca's footsteps. Yeah. And, I got to, interview her and, just watch her career just take off like a lightning bolt. So, yeah. Anyway, I mean, that was all very, a very exciting moment, I think. And Rick McKay, I had co-produced his first movie, Broadway, The Golden Age, and then was involved with bringing out the second movie, Broadway, Beyond the Golden Age. So he was a very, very good friend of mine, and actually had kind of suggested that he team with me because I had this interview at Channel 13's City Arts, and I was a little nervous about going by myself because my shows were kind of, we were cable access, and City Arts was almost like little mini short films. It's like they hired really good filmmakers. One of the editors from Pumping Iron that I knew was, making films for them. Anyway, he went with me, and we started, the first thing we pitched was Broadway, and we got the first thing we pitched. And over the years, I did 3 different pieces with him at City Arts. So, I loved working with him, and he had done this particular show for me as a favor because he said I'd done so much for him that he wanted to, pay back. And it was a fun way to pay back because it's, doesn't involve money, which he didn't have anyway, and I didn't want. But this was very, very special because I could never get Bradshaw to do it because he was always so busy. And so I always look back at that, backstage at the Sound of Music is one of my favorite pieces from Jamie deRoy and Friends. And all 3 of the things that we did for City Arts, Rick and I, were really special. The first one, we were going to do the Broadway season, but then they called and said that they had to move us up by 3 weeks because they just got something submitted and they couldn't air it. And could we, bring this in sooner? And I said we we could bring something in sooner, but not this, because shows hadn't opened, wouldn't be open, and we couldn't get the footage we needed. So we changed the whole premise of it, and it was, where do musicals come from? So we went to like a backers audition, and we went to the NAMP festival, and we went to various places and talked to people about how you get a musical on. And then the second one was a little out of our field, but quite fun. Our guest host was Kitty Carlisle Hart. We went to the Diamond exhibit at the Museum of Natural History.
Mhm.
And they got us Prince Dimitri, who I had met years before, because he worked at Sotheby's. So he took Kitty around to the exhibits, and it was incredible. He shows her Elizabeth Taylor's diamond, which they had on display. It was so big. And she looks at it and she goes, "It's a very big stone for a very little woman." And then the third piece was the biggest little operas in New York. And we went to the Amato Opera Company. We went to Opera Works. We went to Da Capo, where Anton Coppola was the conductor. And we put this piece together on little opera companies. We went to Astes, even was in existence then, where the waiters sang opera in between meals, in between courses and whatnot. And then we got nominated for an Emmy from that one. So it was a very exciting time.
Yeah. So when it comes to producing, what gets you interested in producing a particular show?
Everything is different. I mean, sometimes, I've done a few of Mike Birbiglia's shows. I just happen to really love him as a comedian. Certain shows, Cheetah was the first one. I adored her. When, Angels in America, such an iconic, important piece. The Ferryman, important, the Lehman trilogy, a really incredible story, and incredibly told by three actors playing all of the roles. Just so many different reasons for getting involved in something. There's no one reason. When I was asked to do Lawrence Fishburne doing Thurgood, I always admired Thurgood Marshall, and I always admired Lawrence Fishburne. So it was kind of, this is kind of cool. And it was just a one-person show, which one-person shows, I have to say, are the hardest shows to make successful. They really are. I mean, years and years ago, before I ever produced anything in my life, David Susskind had said to me that that's the hardest piece of theater that you can ever do, because I had complimented him on a show that he produced with Roy Dotrice called Brief Lives. And I was so impressed with it. But at that point, I never, saw myself producing. So who knew,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, The Inheritance was another one that I felt was a story that needed to be told. And so that's why I wanted to be part of that. Vanya and Sonia and Masha and Spike, I got involved with that because I adore Christopher Durang. He was a pal. It was at Lincoln Center. I went to see it. I fell in love with it. I had been friends with Sigourney Weaver, and she was starring in it. It was like, of course I want to do that, just so many different reasons. The first British show I got involved with was the Norman Conquest, which I just always knew was an incredible play that was actually a trilogy. And I loved it. I just thought Alan Ayckbourn was a genius writer. He writes like in puzzles. You could see the Norman Conquest there's like part 1, part 2, part 3, but you could see it in any order. It didn't matter because it just meshed together.
Mm-hmm.
They'd walk out of the room and then the next thing took place in the other room. The other part. so everything's different. And the band's visit I saw at the Atlantic Theater, and I fell in love with that. Thought it was really a great story. And Gentleman's Guide to Love and Murder, that one I got to see in a very, very early preview. I fell in love with it. I knew Stephen Lotvak, one of the writers. I knew him through Cabaret. I thought it was so funny and so clever. And between Jefferson Mays and Bryce Pinkham, it was just, I thought it was brilliant. Mm-hmm. And so, there's just something that gets to you of why you want to be involved, It's like Ain't Too Proud, it was the music, Tina, the music. But there's never one thing that, I only do, this kind of whatever. Mm-hmm. With Primary Stages, I happen to have done a lot of A.R. Gurney's plays, like Black Tie was one of my favorites, and a lot of Horton Foote, which Harrison, Texas, which was one of it, but my absolute favorite was Dividing the Estate. And so that, there's just something that brings you to a piece of theater that makes you want to be involved. And I can't always put my hand on it. And it's not always going to be the same reason every time. Mm-hmm. And sometimes somebody might bring something to me that if I weren't already so busy with other do, because, my plate was just too full.
Mm-hmm. Is there a particular show that's currently out right now or that's coming out that you're producing? You don't have to say what it is that you're just super excited about for people to see or have been seeing.
Well, honestly, all of the things that I'm kind of working on now. I mean, Leopoldstadt opened, a while ago, but it's a beautiful, beautiful play with a really important story to tell. And I think it's brilliant. I had seen that in they filmed the play and then they showed it on, I went down to see it in a screening, and I got to see it that way. And that's when I fell in love with it. Plus it's Tom Stoppard, who I think is just a genius writer.
Yeah.
But so that's still playing. I'm very excited about New York, New York. Mm-hmm. I'm very excited about Goodnight Oscar.
I cannot wait to see that show. I was hoping, because I know they did it in Chicago, and I was really hoping they were going to bring it to New York, and they did. So that's also on my list of things I want to see.
Yeah, and it's about Oscar Levant, who is originally from Pittsburgh and who lived in the building I live in now. Oh. And I had done a play with Sean Hayes prior, An Act of God. So I was already a fan of his, not only from television, but from theater. And so, I'm very, very, very excited about that. Parade is another one of these really important stories to tell. It's beautifully done. Yeah. It's everything about it, I think, is just brilliant. And Life of Pi is, I'm very excited about. The puppetry in Life of Pi is amazing. Mm-hmm. It's just totally brilliant. And Peter Pan Goes Wrong, I'm excited about that because I also did the play that goes wrong.
Just the playbills alone for the play that goes wrong was brilliant. So, and I have a 4-year-old niece, and my sister actually brought her to see Peter Pan Goes Wrong yesterday. So I'm very curious to see how she liked it. And I'm very excited for that one as well.
Oh, really?
Mm-hmm.
Well, she got to see it before even I got to see. I had to watch on a like an abbreviated YouTube, but it was enough to convince me because I had already worked with them, the Mischief Company, on the play that goes wrong, which I think is brilliantly clever. Yeah. And we did it on Broadway. Then we moved it off Broadway, and it's still playing off Broadway. So thrilled about that. And another kind of sweet one in my grouping of things that I have a soft spot for was Peter and the Starcatcher, which I got to see at the New York Theater Workshop. And then we moved that to Broadway, and then from Broadway to off Broadway.
Yeah.
But it was just the kind of theater that it forces you to use your imagination, which I really loved. And Celia Keenan Bolger was the only female in it, and she was brilliant. And then, not that I cast her, but I was lucky enough that she was cast in To Kill a Mockingbird. So I got to, work with her again. And I'm a huge fan of her work.
Yeah, I actually, I mean, for those who have listened to the podcast know this, but during the pandemic, I directed a couple of virtual readings, and I did a virtual reading of Rabbit Hole, and we were lucky enough to get Celia Keenan Bolger to do it.
She's just terrific.
And like really? To this day, we're all still just like, I can't believe she said yes to doing a reading from like these unknown people. And we're just like, hey, would you like to do this reading of Rabbit Hole? And she said yes. And we were trying to find somebody to play the role of Howard, and she was really helpful in trying to find somebody, but eventually we found somebody, but she's wonderful. Yeah.
It's so nice when, actors also, I think they like to help their friends,
yeah,
and recommend their friends. And I mean, all of theater is so collaborative. I don't know if everybody out there that's not in the theater realizes like how collaborative it is, because it takes so many working parts to come together and to come together in a harmonious way to make it work. And when, you're involved with co-producing something, you're giving work to so many people from so many avenues and different fields and different unions. And I mean, it's, that's why the pandemic, I think, was just so awful, is that it's just that everything totally stopped. And it wasn't just the actors are out of work. It's the stagehands and the costume people, and just the people, the usher, everybody, theater owners. I mean, just even the restaurants, because it all trickles down.
Yeah.
To everything, even getting the cab to get to the theater.
Yeah. Like front of house. I have a lot of friends who worked front of house. I used to do front of house. I used to sell merch at Broadway shows. I mean, the last show I worked was actually Fiddler on the Roof, the production you produced. But I stopped like at that point. But many people I know still were doing merch shows. I have one of my best friends. She was an usher. So it affects everybody. Front of house, behind the scenes, on stage, the audience members, restaurants, tourism in general, it affects as well. Because, if you come to New York to see a particular show, you're staying at a hotel, you're going out to eat, you're sightseeing, you're going shopping. So it's a huge wheel that, the pandemic affected.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
And we're glad things are, coming back to life again. We really need that to keep our city and every city going. I mean, we're not even, look at Chicago with all the theater that they do, and there's theater being done all over the country. So it's just and I love to get involved with the road shows of shows that I've been involved with on Broadway. I don't usually come into just a road show, but if I was involved on Broadway and they say we're going to send this on the road, I usually stick with the show. So right now, like Ain't Too Proud's on the road. Pretty Woman is just wrapping up on the road, but there's been a lot of Tina Turner's on the road. I mean, a lot of shows out there that if you missed in New York are going to be coming to, as possibly a city near you. Actually, a friend of mine said that they're going to catch Ain't Too Proud in Wisconsin, because they had bought tickets, but they had bought it and during when the pandemic shut them down. So they're going to like go in Wisconsin. It's like, okay, I've never bought tickets for anyone in Wisconsin, but happy to help.
Yeah. So you talked about you like to be involved with shows that are on the road. What about shows that go over to the UK. So Pretty Woman right now is playing in the West End. How does that work? Are
Oh
you
yeah.
involved with that, or is that a
And
separate thing?
no, well, because we started it, well, it started out of town,
Yeah, in
but
Chicago.
I started with it, we started in Chicago, then Broadway, then on the road, and London, and it's done really well in London. I think it's wrapping up like at the beginning of the summer, but
Mhm.
it did really, really well. So yes, and Mockingbird has been in London, and they are just recasting. And yeah, I love being involved in London. And I actually, it's a little easier for me when it starts here and then goes to London than if it starts in London,
Yeah.
just because my investors are here. But if
Mhm.
it's going to London, they're like, oh yeah, I want to be
Yeah.
involved in London. But it's like sometimes it's a little harder to get people interested in doing something in London because they don't live there.
Yeah.
Um and but London, you can produce in London for far less money than you can in New York City on Broadway, far
Yeah.
less.
I'm
um
hoping to go to London within like the next few months. And I was talking to a friend of mine about, when I'm there, what show I should see, because it's very hard to see a show that's there that you can't already see in New York or you haven't seen in New York. And then she was also saying that her friend was just there and she was saying how much cheaper tickets are in London compared to New York.
well, when I'm there, it's always like we want to see something that we might want to bring to New York,
Yeah.
or that there that it may not ever come to New York,
Yeah.
or had been in New York and is, I listen, I'm one of these people. When you go to London, you find every available time slot that they have theater, and you work your schedule around those.
Yeah.
They have some Thursday matinees.
Hmm.
So there's sometimes that you can go like Thursday afternoon and Thursday night, and
Yeah.
Saturday afternoon, Saturday night. They have more different days that have matinees than we do. We only basically have like Wednesday, and then Saturday, and Sunday.
Mhm.
Um, and if the play has a Sunday matinee, they're not going to have a Monday show. So,
Mhm.
but if they have a Monday show, they probably won't have a Sunday matinee. So,
Yeah.
but yeah, I'm like the tourist that comes here to try to catch as much as they can. When I go to
Yeah.
London, I'm trying, as probably you do too, to try to catch everything you possibly can.
Yeah, there's one particular show that is sold out in the time frame that I want to go to London. So hopefully I can somehow magically get a ticket for it. So either like
What
cancellation,
show is that?
A Little Life.
Oh, I don't even know that one.
So it's based on a book called A Little Life. It's like 800 pages and it takes place in New York about these four college friends. Ivan Von Ho, he wrote it and he's directing it. And they did it in Dutch, in like a couple of places. They brought it to New York at BAM a couple of years ago. And now it's in the West End. It just played the Richmond Theater, and then it's going to the Harold Pinter Theater, and then it's going to be at the Savoy Theater. And there are two cast members in the show who I know and I'm fans of. So it's James Norton and Luke Thompson are in the show. So
Ah,
I would like to, and they're very good stage actors. So I would like to see them in it. And it's a
oh, that's
very,
cool.
yeah, my friend calls it, or she's heard it's like trauma porn because it's a very heavy show, especially what happens to one of the characters in particular. But there's lighthearted moments and things like that. But I'm still craving like a really good meaty piece of theater that I feel like I haven't seen in a while. Not to say what I haven't seen hasn't been great, but something to like shake my core like The Ferryman did.
Right. Well, I mean, I remember going to the National Theater
Mhm.
to see Network, and
Yes.
Bryan Cranston, and then you go, oh my God, I have to be involved with this.
Yeah.
And plus he's just like the nicest guy in the world, in addition to being just a terrific actor.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's one thing the pandemic really, because I haven't been to London in quite a while, and I am totally looking forward to going soon. I don't have a date yet, but I do plan on, trying to get there soon, because it's just, I feel like it's been too long.
Yeah. Well,
and
if
I
we
think when you
overlap
stop
on our
traveling,
trips, we should see a show together if we end up overlapping.
that's absolutely, you'll let me know when you're going.
Yeah, like May or June, hopefully.
And
So
yet you never know. I mean, yeah, because I mean, Ain't Too Proud is going to open there very soon. I'm not going to be able to be there for the opening, but maybe I'll be able to catch it while it's there. And
yeah.
and Tina Turner had the opposite. It started in
Yeah.
London and then came here. So but I would say many, many more cases of things starting in London and coming here than starting here and going to London.
Yeah. Like a good example of that. Well, you have that Jodie Cromer show, Prima something. And yes.
Yeah, that's coming here for 10 weeks.
Yes. And Back to the Future.
Right. Exactly.
Yeah. I hear that show.
Well, and I guess a lot of producers, are starting to think about that. Even if it wasn't started by the Brits, that if you start it there, it's less money to start it there than it would be to start it here. I'll tell you, it's very, very hard to open a show cold on Broadway that hasn't been anywhere else. I mean, like Thurgood was up at Westport, Connecticut before it came into New York. It had James Earl Jones in it, not Lawrence Fishburne, but it didn't matter. The play, they were, if there were any kinks to work out, they worked it out there. It's just always a little bit scary to do it straight to Broadway, because the critics can be so tough. And now, I mean, listen, you can go even way out of town and they'll still send some critic, and hopefully they don't destroy you before you even have a chance to start to work on the show. Because that is the idea of out of town.
Well, it's interesting. There was one show that I don't want to name names, but there was one show that came to Broadway, and when it was out of town, it got really good reviews. But when it came to Broadway, the reviews weren't as great as they were when they were out of town. So I don't really know how that works, but I'm not a critic. I just see a show if I want to see it.
Well, it actually happened to me on a play I'm involved with, where Coram Boy was and couldn't get tickets at the National Theater. You were for the New York Times reviewed it here. I think it was Ben Brantley in London and Charles Isherwood here. At very different reviews, and we did not last long. And I'm sorry that it didn't, because I always thought that was a really incredible play with a horrible but important story to tell. And at one point in the play, they sang the Hallelujah chorus, which was so beautiful. Handel's Hallelujah chorus, and that was like, whoa. And I was just sorry that people didn't get to see it. I just thought it was not given a fair shake. But that happens sometimes. And people are quick to say, they took the intermission out because people were leaving in droves or something. Well, no, you know what? The intermission was actually never in. They put it in, and then they realized it was better with it out. Not because people were leaving in droves. The play just worked as a one act. And today, in today's market, a 90-minute or 90 to 100-minute show is very palatable. Whereas when I was growing up, I don't remember, those kind of shows at all. They were, a lot of them were 3 acts. I mean, whoa.
Well, it's like you mentioned earlier, sometimes people just don't have the attention span to like sit and listen to something. I mean, maybe even watch at this point. But I mean, you still have musicals that are like 2.5 hours. A lot of plays about like 90 minutes. I mean, Leopoldstadt is what, like 2 hours, no intermission?
Yeah, I think it's 2 hours and 10 minutes with no intermission.
Yeah.
And most musicals run between anywhere from 2:15 to 2.5 with an intermission, or up, as long as 3 hours with an intermission. But longer than that, you run into, not only you lose the audience, but then you go into overtimes.
Yeah.
So nobody really wants to do that.
Yeah.
But The Inheritance was in 2 parts
Yeah.
because
So
it was so long.
Angels in America as well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, but when theater is good, I don't think that there's a time frame that says, oh, well, it's over 3 hours, so it's not good. And it's under 90 minutes, so it is good. I mean, you don't measure theater like that at all.
I agree with you. Mhm.
I just think every play is its own little being, and it has to do the best within its time frame. So if it's meant to be 90 minutes and it works best in 90 or 95 minutes, that's what you do. And if you have to, have it with an intermission and it runs longer, or, I mean, I'm not a huge fan of multiple parts, because it's harder to get audiences to come back and buy tickets for other parts, but that doesn't make it bad theater.
Yeah. Do you have any top going theater experiences?
I'm sorry, I missed that. What?
Your top going theater experiences? What would those be?
Wow. Well, I think The Inheritance would definitely be one of them, because when I was sitting there at the end of, I think it was the end of part 1, and it's been a while since, I'm sure it was the end of part 1, and men start walking down the aisle. I didn't know they were going to do this the first time I saw it. I just felt their presence even before I saw them. And I started crying, because it brought back every friend that I ever lost to AIDS. And I lost it. And luckily I wasn't prepared for this, but I had a lot of Kleenex in my purse, and I had a friend with me. I took the Kleenex out and I handed some of it to her, because I knew if I was crying that she was going to probably be crying too. And it was just, really, really, really moving. But there've been so many incredible experiences over my life of seeing different theater, and I'm hardly ever home, because I'm always seeing theater. So it's pretty hard for me to just pick out like one or two, but I think Leopoldstadt is definitely one of the ones that is quite major for that this is really moving, it's important, and it's like brilliant writing.
Do you have any dream projects that you would want to work on? Even like from a personal, like performance wise, you'd want to do, or from a producing standpoint?
There's a musical that I always love that my friends Barry Kleinbort and Joseph Thalken wrote, called Was. And I think that when Lincoln Center's developed it, it was just the wrong time. I don't know if it's the right time now, but it's a beautiful musical. And there's a beautiful song from it called Time, that's been recorded by very many people. I would love to see that produced at some point. I'd love to see it produced, on Broadway, because of my friendship and my admiration for both Barry Kleinbort and Joseph Thalken. I did go to see it in Chicago once, but it really needs what they call a first class production. In Chicago, it was done at a college mixed in with some professional actors actors, which they do a lot now out of town, actually. That they use the college students and they bring in some professional actors, and we never did that. They only used, people from the school.
Yeah.
And Elizabeth Hartman was in the class ahead of me when I went to school, and I just saw her do a scene that was so brilliant, and they were trying to convince her not to leave school, but she had a movie. She got The Group, and then she got A Patch of Blue, and so her career was like totally ready to take off.
Yeah.
And that's happened to a few people. I mean, Laura Benanti, one of them.
Mm-hmm.
And there's somebody else that was gonna go to CMU. I'm trying to remember who it is now, but she auditioned and she got right into a Broadway show. So, you get into a Broadway show, that's your school.
Yeah.
You suddenly go like, well, I got a job. I'm doing that. I don't blame people doing that.
Yeah. Do you have any advice for anybody who wants to start producing?
Well, probably the only advice, I guess, that I would, say would be that, sometimes it's best to start with either, in your hometown, but if you're in New York, maybe, work with a not-for-profit theater, because they develop a lot of really good plays off Broadway and these not-for-profits. And that's where the band's visit started, at the Atlantic Theater. If it weren't for the Atlantic Theater, it wouldn't have got onto Broadway. The Atlantic Theater also started Hangmen, which we brought to Broadway, which would have had a much different life if it hadn't been for the pandemic.
Yeah.
It's a brilliant play by Martin McDonagh. Martin McDonagh, to me, is one of the great playwrights. He did Behanding in Spokane and so many incredible, movies and plays. And I just think he's a wonderful, wonderful writer. So I kind of think that if there's a place, like I do things with primary stages, it doesn't take as much money to help get something on the boards at primary stages as it does to get it on the boards, even off Broadway, or, certainly Broadway way more, and Broadway's getting more and more expensive. But, primary, the not-for-profits can do things for less money, and listen, and every not-for-profit's different too. The Roundabout has a lot more money than, than Primary Stages has, or than the Transport Group. But the Transport Group they do incredible works, and they do really ingenious renditions of shows in very different ways. And I've seen some wonderful things that they do. And I've helped them out, too, from time to time, because I just think the work they do is really good and very important. And I think you need to, all these not-for-profits have to stay alive to keep theater alive. I think it all feeds into each other.
Yeah. So my last question before we end, why do you think theater is important?
I think it just changes lives. I mean, it lets you look into, lives of others that you can learn about. Maybe it makes you sometimes see yourself on stage. I know, like at Primary Stages, they have a program called Student Matinees, and they bring school kids to see these student matinees. And some of these kids have never seen a play before, and it just opens their eyes. I'm on the board of a group called Inside Broadway, where they bring even younger children to musicals, and they show them the interworkings of the musicals. So they'll have like the understudies come out and sing a little like one of the songs, and they have the stage manager come out and talk about what he does, and they'll show you props moving up and down and light cues. And And these kids get so excited over the littlest thing that goes on stage, and that piques their interest to now want to go see the whole play or the whole musical. But I just think it's the same with music in schools. I never had the opportunity in school to try the violin or the cello or anything. I mean, I took piano lessons like a lot of, my friends, and probably, many, many children. But in my school, they never exposed us to any other instruments. Who knows if I might have taken to the violin or something. I always wanted to try. And when I got a little older, I thought, why can't I? First of all, I wish I could accompany myself on the piano, which I can't. And second of all, I'd like to be able to accompany myself on the guitar. And that would have been an instrument that when I was young, not, I tried to pick it up when I was an adult, and much, much harder. But it would be so cool to be able to play the guitar and, either accompany yourself or then you can, it's like a great way to write songs because you have a little bit of music behind you. And I think that all these music programs and all the theater programs, they help all kinds of kids, all ages, in all various levels of life, and including how to stand in front of an audience, or to give a talk, or to even to have a conversation with somebody. And I think, speaking of conversation, that's the one thing that kids these days are probably really lacking, is because of all this stuff with texting and emails, that I think a lot of young people don't really know how to have a conversation, and they don't know how to listen. And listening and having a conversation, even though they're two different things, they do go hand in hand. And you have to listen to somebody in order to have a good conversation with them. And I know a lot of people, and they're not all young people. There's some adults I know that are really bad listeners. And it's almost annoying, because you start to say something and they go off on some other tangent, and you're going like, my God, I didn't even finish my sentence, and they can't, and it's, I don't know. I don't know what it is today with people that can't let somebody finish a thought.
Yeah. Well, Jamie, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. Before we end, is there anything? Yeah, thank you. Is there anything you'd like to add, ask, say?
No, I just like to get, people to go out there and see theater. And, there are different ways of seeing theater. I mean, there's groups like Theater Development Fund, TDF, that you can join for $40 a year and get discount tickets to Broadway and off-Broadway shows all year round.
They also, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but they also have off-Broadway, dance, opera. So it's not only just Broadway and off-Broadway that they offer. They do offer pretty much everything in the arts if you do become a member of TDF.
Which is great. And then there's, other kinds of groups like Theater Extras, and there's various play-by-play where that you join for, I don't know, like maybe $99 a year. And if, they sometimes will get these comps. They're basically comps which you may pay $4.50 service charge for, but you get to see a great play, because maybe it's at the beginning of a show's run and they're just trying to get their audience in.
Yeah.
There's a lot of different ways of buying tickets where you don't have to pay full amounts. And I also like to tell people to be careful when they go online to buy tickets, because some of these websites lead you to something, that will oversell the tickets. I mean, when I overprice them. Somebody told me in Wisconsin, that they went online to buy tickets in June for Ain't Too Proud, and they were $1,600. And I said, that is impossible. I will help you get tickets. I think that they're, being led to these groups that, that are selling the tickets for way too much money. It's so wrong. We want to have people see more theater, not less.
Yeah.
So, and go to the tickets booth at 47th Street in Times Square.
Mm-hmm.
And you can not only go to the tickets booth and stand in line, before they open, but you can go at the last minute sometimes and still get tickets.
Yeah.
Or you can look online for discount tickets and go to the theater with a code and get tickets. There's so many ways to see theater look, some people aren't going to want to sit in the balcony. So they will buy the orchestra seats. That's fine. But when I was a kid, I sat in the balcony all the time and saw some of the greatest theater in my life, like Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf with Uta Hagen. I mean, just get to the theater wherever you sit and experience it, and your life will totally be changed.
I'm
And
not
your attitude
so much because I used to work in hotels and I used to sell theater tickets. And, I would straight up tell guests, like, wherever you sit, it's going to be good because you're going to be in the theater seeing the show. I mean, some people wanted better seats than others, but I never sold tickets to rear mezzanine of Studio 54 because those seats are no good to me, at least. But, rear mezzanine, done. Rear mezzanine, this theater, done. You're going to have a great time no matter what show you're seeing. Like the last 2 shows I saw, I was like all the way up. I saw Parade. I was in the last row of the mezzanine and I still had a great time seeing the show.
Wow. Well, I saw a Parade from the orchestra and I saw it from the mezzanine. And I saw it originally at City Center, which is, where I decided, yes, that's something I want to be a part of. But I saw different things on the stage when I was in the mezzanine than I did when I was in the orchestra. So sometimes it's even fun to go back and see things from a different viewpoint.
I agree with you. My old roommate and I saw Spring Awakening many times, and the best time we ever had seeing it, we were in like the last row of the mezzanine. So I think it just depends on the person in the show.
When I was a kid, I was living in New York, but Alec Guinness was in town doing about Dylan Thomas. And I went to see him once and I thought it was so good. And then I kept going back and getting standing room and standing in the back and watching this actor do this play. And it was like an absolute masterclass in acting. And I didn't care that I was standing. I was young. What did I care? Or I, would sit in the very last row. In those days, the very last row was cheap.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can even find a seat to move down to so that you have a better view. But even if I didn't find the seat, I still was seeing the actors and I still was experiencing it. And I loved it.
Yeah. That's what's so great about theater. Well, Jamie, thank you so much for coming on. It was such a joy chatting with you.
Thank you. Well, it's so nice to meet you too, Allison.
Yeah,
and I hope I do end up, being in London when you're in London.
Yes, but you can stay on once I'm done recording. And thank you for those who are listening. And go see a show.